Good afternoon. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Ambassador Merav Zafary-Odiz. It is a great pleasure because I've known her for quite some time. We met first in Washington, D.C., when Merav was still undecided where she was going to go. And I am not sure that I had any role to play in that she arrived finally at the Israel Atomic Energy Commission, but I would like to think so. I was at the time on my last final sabbatical as a civil servant from the Israel Atomic Energy Commission, and I was sure that Ambassador Zafary-Odiz would make, she was not that at the time, she would make a great addition to the team in Tel Aviv. And the fact that she is now the ambassador to the IAEA and to the CTBTO in Geneva, in Vienna, attests to her achievements. Merav has been in Vienna since mid-October 2013. She joined the Israel Atomic Energy Commission in 2001, where she served in multiple positions, the last of which was the Director of Policy and Arms Control Department. And in 2012-2013, she spent 1 year at the Israel National Defense College. She holds a Master's of Public Policy from the Goldman School of Public Policy from the University of California at Berkeley, at the USA, and a BA in International Relations and Political Science from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. So please.
Good afternoon. I would first like to thank the INSS for inviting me to speak at this conference. As a frequent participant in INSS conferences in the past, I'm especially grateful for having given the opportunity to address you today and to meet and interact with colleagues and friends. When Emily approached me with the possibility of giving a keynote address at a conference, I naturally asked her on which topic. Emily's answer challenged me more than I expected, as she said that it is up to me as a keynote speaker to choose the topic. This is a first to me, to be given an important stage to speak on a topic of my choosing. Those who have known me can confirm that there is nothing that I would like to talk about more than nuclear policy and nuclear diplomacy. I believe that the audience in this particular conference can appreciate that my job is a challenging one. So I thought I'd share with you today some of my longer than you might think experience, especially from the past 20 months since I assumed the position of Israel's ambassador to the IAEA and the CTBTO. So after this long introduction, let me begin by telling you a secret. One of my main challenges is not to defend the Israeli nuclear policy or to fight the Iranian nuclear program, but rather to make my colleagues in Vienna realize that I, as a representative of the State of Israel in the nuclear domain, am a normal, reasonable, responsible, and constructive person. In other words, my job is to fight and change misperceptions, especially as I'm not a professional diplomat, but rather a representative coming from the Israel Atomic Energy Commission. Because my experience has shown that when I achieve this, I get the opportunity to make them realize that the Israeli nuclear policy has also been reasonable, responsible, realistic, consistent, and constructive. Maybe not normal in the literal sense of the word, as Israel's case is a unique one, but I would stress that it is unique in a positive sense. How do I achieve this, you may ask yourselves. My personal strategy is to be present everywhere I'm invited to. And if you were wondering, the invitation condition is what leaves me time for my family. But being present isn't enough in itself. I believe that the way to convince people is to present them with facts and provide them with logical explanations. So what I will do with the rest of my time is provide some of these accounts to you. Let me start from the beginning. Israel was one of the first countries who joined the IAEA in 1957. We have had a broad agenda with the agency since then, both as beneficiaries and as donors. The technical assistance field is one obvious example, but there are others in the fields of safety and security, as well as safeguards. Israel actively participates in all the IAEA's Safety Standards Committee, including in the field of nuclear security, and is also represented in an advisory committee to the IAEA's Director General on nuclear applications. We also adhere to key IAEA conventions and codes of conduct in the field of nuclear safety. When Israel built its nuclear research reactor in Sorek in the late 50s, it submitted it to safeguards, which in 1965 became IAEA safeguards. And in 2013, the IAEA conducted a peer review of the safety of this reactor called Integrated Nuclear Safety Assessment of Research Reactors, or INSAR. This relates, by the way, to one important misconception, which is that Israel does not have any IAEA safeguards in its nuclear facilities. What I often have to do when I speak about this issue is to also remind my audience that Israel is a sovereign state which made a conscious decision not to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty for reasons I will elaborate later on. The fact that the Nuclear Research Center in Dimona is not subject to safeguards is not a violation of any obligation. Israel decided early on that this center will not be open to external visitors, and it has remained its policy ever since. Going back to the IAEA, Israel was unfortunately essentially forced over the years to shift some of its diplomatic efforts dedicated to the IAEA to a political struggle, which was imported from other UN fora to the IAEA General Conference. The most prominent issue in this regard is a draft resolution submitted by the Arab Group and entitled Israeli Nuclear Capabilities, or INC, after the word threat was deleted from this title. Sounds like an interesting title, but it is in fact beyond the scope of the agency's mandate, and its main purpose is to single out Israel. For those who are not familiar with the text of the draft resolution, it calls upon Israel to accede to the NPT and place all its nuclear facilities under comprehensive IAEA safeguards, as well as urges the Director General to work with the concerned states towards achieving that end and to submit a comprehensive annual report on the implementation of this resolution. Clearly, this is neither the mission of the IAEA nor the role of its Director General, and he will not be in a position to implement any of these pointless requests if such a resolution is adopted. Raising this issue in the IAEA context advances nothing and is counterproductive for regional trust and confidence. It simply politicizes the agency, harms its professional integrity, and wastes the precious time of all IAEA member states. This unconstructive political draft resolution was defeated, not for the first time, in the last General Conference in September. We worked hard to get to that outcome, from the Prime Minister down to the working level, and we succeeded despite the complex situation that Israel was facing last September in the aftermath of Operation Tzuk Eitan in Gaza. My personal assessment is that most countries who vote with Israel do so because they realize that this resolution is harmful for the agency and certainly doesn't advance their goals related to our region. But there are also those countries, sometimes in the least expected parts of the world, that do so because of their true friendship to the State of Israel and their understanding that it is a political choice to go against those who advance even what they believe will not gain support for the sole purpose of harassing and shaming Israel. By defeating this draft resolution, member states reaffirmed their conviction and position that politically motivated initiatives aimed towards singling out any IAEA member state have no place in the General Conference. While Israel remains hopeful that the Arab group will opt to regional dialogue rather than to continued political struggle in international fora, we are prepared to defeat once again such a draft resolution in the upcoming General Conference should the Arab group decide to impose such a negative draft resolution on the GC. This is basically an attempt to deflect the international community's attention from the regional turmoil and from violations of states in the region of their international obligations. It does not only ignore Israel's continued policy of restraint and responsibility in the nuclear domain, but also disregards Israel's forthcoming approach, particularly in the last few years. And I think we heard about it yesterday from Ambassador Shapiro. I believe that this is a symptom of a much broader phenomena. Our neighbors often speak about a double standard when they refer to the treatment Israel receives from the international community. But in fact, it is exactly those critics who expect Israel to behave by a different standard than any other sovereign country. Countries operate in accordance with their national interests. This is International Relations 101. So does Israel. So do Israel's allies. Let me demonstrate this by briefly describing the events leading to the last NPT Review Conference, which took place in New York last month. What everyone now knows is that three countries, namely the US, the UK, and Canada, could not join consensus on the draft final document. The events that preceded this unfortunate outcome are much less known and are sometimes purposely ignored. The bottom line is that these countries, who also happen to be friends of Israel, did so because it was against their principles to support the proposed final document, which, due to the uncompromising position of Egypt, included unacceptable text on the Middle East. It is also often convenient to forget that the review conference achieved little agreements on many issues, and that many countries were actually relieved that the draft final document was not adopted, and that the Middle East issue was once again cited as the reason for that outcome. Israel decided to be an observer at the last NPT Review Conference for the first time in 20 years. It did so not to signal an upcoming change in its policy towards the treaty, but rather to signal its willingness to engage with its neighbors on regional security matters in every relevant forum possible. Two other non-NPT states did not think it was important for them to observe this forum. In doing so, Israel remained true to its principles relating to direct dialogue with members of the region based on a broad agenda of regional security issues. These principles were not born overnight, but rather reflect a long-standing, consistent policy that has enjoyed the support of all Israeli governments, from the first to the current one. This policy advocates, first and foremost, regional confidence building, mutual recognition, normal relations, and direct dialogue. Without these, we don't believe it is possible to contemplate talking about arms control measures. How can any country be expected to join an arms control arrangement with a country that doesn't even recognize its right to exist? This is not a realistic or reasonable expectation. Israel presented its vision on regional security and arms control in the early 90s in the context of the Arms Control and Regional Security Working Group known as ACRS. At the basis of this vision is the belief that a global regime like the NPT is an external effort, a global solution that does not get to the root of the enormous lack of trust among countries in the region. One size does not fit all in this case. We need a regional solution for the Middle East, and this solution relies on the establishment of a mutually, effectively, and comprehensively verifiable weapons of mass destruction-free zone. Israel envisages a mutual verification regime that stems from countries at the regional level opening their doors to each other and working through a gradual process of confidence building. This vision has not changed despite the negative developments in our region. There is a process that we in the region have to go through. It's a genuine expectation, not a delay tactic. This has been the experience in all other regions which ended up establishing a zone free of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapon-free zones were not and cannot be imposed from outside. They have to emanate from the collective political desire of the regional parties who can assure each other that they will resort to peaceful means in resolving their conflicts. Each regional state must also be assured that any regional arrangement will improve rather than detract from its national security. One among many unique features of the region is the lack of the region's definition. Who will be part of that zone? Who will take upon itself new obligations? There is no one internationally recognized definition of the Middle East. We should also be mindful of the fact that there is no existing zone free of all weapons of mass destruction. Going back to the review conference and the President's proposal that was put for adoption, as any other sovereign country, Israel cannot agree to any attempt to impose on it a predetermined outcome. Decisions which seek to circumvent and substitute direct engagement or the building of trust and confidence among regional parties will neither assist a regional process nor hasten a successful outcome. Israel insists on direct dialogue divorced from UN auspices, which is often used as a cover for something else. It also insists on the consensus rule for all decisions, which is natural and beyond reasonable when vital interests are at stake. It should also be emphasized that notions of direct engagement and consensus are accepted norms in international diplomacy. Both were rejected by the Arab group, led by Egypt. In the past 2 years, Israel participated at senior levels in 5 rounds of multilateral regional consultations held in Switzerland between October 2013 and June 2014 under the leadership of the Finnish Under-Secretary of State, Ambassador Jaakko Laajava. The purpose of these consultations was to reach an agreement by consensus among the regional parties on the required arrangements in relation to the possibility of convening a regional conference in Helsinki on the establishment of the Middle East as a zone free of all WMD and their means of delivery. Israel was willing to attend a 6th round of multilateral consultations to seek regional consensus on all the essential aspects of a conference in Helsinki, including the agenda, the concluding document, and the necessary modalities. However, due to the evasive position of the Arab group, the 6th round of consultations in Geneva was postponed several times and did not take place, preventing necessary progress towards a consensual agreement on a conference in Helsinki. Needless to say that Iran and Syria did not participate in those consultations. This was not even mentioned in New York. We wonder what message does that carry with it. Despite the negative attitude by the Arab group that has opted to an anti-Israeli campaign and presenting draft resolutions in the IAEA and the UN First Committee, Israel, for its part, remained and still remains committed to a positive and productive approach towards a meaningful regional discussion based on mutual respect of various regional positions. My personal lesson from these developments is that our rivals are simply not prepared to take yes for an answer from Israel. They base their strategies on the assumption that Israel will say no. But what they are missing is that Israel's credentials speak for themselves. This is one important reason that allows Israel, maybe not often enough, to gain the required support to defeat their ill-motivated initiatives. I'm often asked by different crowds, how does it feel to represent Israel in the nuclear domain and attack NPT member states on their treaty violations while Israel is a non-NPT state? My response to them is that I do it with great confidence, as Israel's credentials in the non-proliferation field are good ones. It's not an easy job, not because I don't have much to work with, but because it's sometimes difficult to find people who are willing to put aside their prejudices or their convenient positions that support the underdog and listen to the motivations, arguments, and reasons for our policy. Israel remains a responsible country outside the NPT, whereas regional NPT members behave irresponsibly and violate their obligations under the treaty. Moving to another topic, I'm also accredited to the CTBTO. Yes, Israel signed an arms control treaty in the nuclear domain, a treaty that it helped negotiate in the mid-90s. The CTBT is a treaty that Israel intends to ratify. It will do so when the time is ripe, when certain considerations are met, when it can ensure that it can enjoy the same rights as any other member state, to name one consideration. This is currently not the case, because Iran does not recognize Israel and is not willing to accept the fact that Israel belongs to its natural geographical group, that is MESA, Middle East and South Asia. Yes, it's the issue of the recognition again. The Iranian ambassador in Vienna cannot be seen in the same room, not even in the same elevator, with the Israeli ambassador, even if she is of Iranian descent. It sounds funny, but it's my reality, our reality, and it has implications on our policy. Even in the IAEA, where we have been members for nearly 60 years, we remain one of the few countries who do not belong to any regional group and can therefore never serve a term in the Board of Governors. This is yet another challenge that I took upon myself to address during my term. Israel has been very active in the CTBT scenes since it signed the treaty in 1996. Israel hosts 2 of the 321 monitoring stations as part of the treaty's verification regime, as well as one of the 16 radionuclide laboratories. We were represented in the major OSI exercise that took place in Jordan in November 2013, and only 2 months ago, Israel hosted in Ramat Gan the first OSI workshop on the lessons learned from the exercise, with the participation of over 100 experts from 30 countries. This was not a trivial activity for Israel, as it should have been, because regional parties, led by Iran, objected to allow Israel to host such an important activity in the context of the treaty. It was another challenge we had to overcome. That leads me to the Iranian issue. Even I understood that Emily meant that any topic of my choosing should include Iran. None of us present knows for sure whether in a short while there will be a final agreement between the EU 3+3 and Iran. But what Israel is certain about is that this will not be a good enough agreement. It will be lacking on multiple issues, big and small. It will leave Iran with an extensive legitimate enrichment program, R&D capabilities, and most likely without sufficient treatment of weaponization-related issues. There are already warning signs about Iran's willingness to allow the IAEA to implement its verification and monitoring work, which in turn will have no levers on Iran. This can be detrimental for the agency's credibility. Most worrisome is that it will leave the impression for others that they can get away with it. This will be a missed opportunity to enhance the IAEA's mandate, capabilities, and credibility. We believe that this is something that the international community cannot afford, as much as it cannot afford a nuclear-capable Iran. The Israeli position toward the Iranian program, just like its position toward the non-proliferation regime, was also not born overnight. Let us not forget that, in fact, 4 out of 5 cases of non-compliance with the treaty occurred in the Middle East. The lesson we learned from it is that regimes like those that exist in our region have no inhibition signing arms control treaties and violating them. They are not concerned about the accountability to their own people, let alone to the international community. So how can Israel put its trust and its security in the belief that if we just all join the right treaties, everything will be okay? We live in a region that is boiling, where states are falling apart and losing large territories to non-state actors, where multiple non-state actors conduct terrorist acts supported by states, and with a growing rocket and missile threat. Our conclusion is therefore that we have to be able to defend ourselves by ourselves against any threat or combination of threats. Last but not least, let us not forget the IAEA investigation on Syria that is going nowhere for several years already. 4 years have elapsed since the Board of Governors resolution found Syria to be in non-compliance with its Safeguards Agreement's obligations, given clear evidence that Syria built a clandestine nuclear reactor at the Deir el-Azur site. 4 years and the Syrian file remains an open one. Unfortunately, some member states simply think that the current reality in the region is a sufficient excuse to push the issue off the international agenda. We hope that reason will continue to prevail in this case. Since I cannot leave you with a gloomy ending, I think it is important to stress that Israel remains willing to engage with anyone who is genuinely interested. I often tell people that this is the Israeli psyche. We want to be accepted, embraced, recognized, and all the words that any thesaurus can find, be it in Hebrew, Arabic, or Persian. So we will never close the door to regional engagement, or even on the most difficult issues. We remain hopeful that regional circumstances will evolve to allow regional peace and security, and we are willing once again to contribute to a process leading to a desirable regional arrangement. One thing I know for sure, my work will never end. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for a very illuminating talk. And we can take a few questions, if any. Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation. I am Dina Hekel from the Egyptian Embassy. Okay, can you hear me? Of course, I disagree with lots of what you said, especially about the Egyptian attempt or the Arab attempt to single out Israel in these talks, the Gileon talks or the Geneva talks, because this is, from our point of view, this is not the forum to do it. We also participated in these talks. Israel, 22 Arab countries participated at the same table with Israel, despite the fact that they don't have diplomatic relations with Israel, because we wanted to establish something. We wanted to agree on something. Israel took a very positive position when it agreed to be engaged positively after receiving the invitation from Ambassador Layava. But at the end of the day, nothing happened. Israel is still insisting on its position that it has to discuss regional security arrangements, despite the fact that this is not the forum to discuss these topics, because according to the mandate of the 2010, this forum only focused on the establishment of a WMD-free zone, okay, and it under the auspices of the UN, which Israel continually refused to accept it. For example, your representative during the second round of talk refused even to enter the hall because the UN flag and some guards were there, and he refused to enter unless they removed it, which will happen. And it presented a paper which didn't mention at all the 2010 action plan or the 1995 resolution on the Middle East. And also, you have to take into consideration that the extension of the NPT was a part of a package according to which a WMD-free zone should be established. And when you talk about I understand, of course, we have very important cooperation regarding security and fighting terrorism. But when you talk about the regional engagement, the regional security, how can you expect that the Arab countries will accept to be engaged with Israel in such arrangements without reaching a solution for the Palestinian cause, for example? This is a very important issue. And also, you have also the Arab Peace Initiative, which was presented to the Israeli side since 2010, and it was continually rejected by Israel. And it offered a very good proposal according to which the Arab countries and the Muslim countries can normalize its relation with Israel if there is a solution for the Palestinian case. So a regional security arrangement or talking about the regional security without solving the Palestinian states cannot happen. It's not logic. We are saying that the Arab countries are adopting a very unflexible or unrealistic position. I think it's the other way around. The Israeli position is adopting a very unrealistic position. So we are trying to make a progress in one field, which is the WMD-free zone, the disarmament issue, and also our Minister of Foreign Affairs, ex-Minister of Foreign Affairs, Nabil Fahmy, proposed an initiative during the last General Assembly summit, the one before, according to which Egypt and Israel can take steps to enhance the cooperation in that regard. Egypt can ratify CWC if Israel will ratify CWC, and also that could be applied on the BWC and also on NPT. We asked Israel to join NPT. So we proposed many ideas in that regard. And you are the only country in the region that didn't ratify any of the disarmament treaties, okay? The CTBT, you said that maybe Israel will ratify it when the time is appropriate, but it's not enough also.
Thank you.
I will just say briefly that Israel is not a member of the NPT, and we therefore do not recognize the mandate of the NPT Review Conferences. We're not obliged by the resolutions that are taken by NPT member states We were willing to participate in the negotiations in Lyon and Geneva because we thought this was a constructive approach to have a regional dialogue, a direct regional dialogue. But we don't see any reason why we should follow a mandate that was adopted without us present there and to which we have no obligation to.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? If not, I'll thank again Ambassador Merav Zafary-Odiz for her talk, and thank you all.